Imagine living your life after 50 and feeling energized and excited about your future. Welcome to the Women in the Middle podcast, the podcast for women who are ready to figure out what they want and create the life they deserve. Here's your host and master certified life coach, Susie Rosenstein.
Hey there, today's episode is about why you feel stuck in midlife even when your life looks fine. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast Women in the Middle with over 2 million downloads and counting. I'm your host, Susie Rosenstein, your next chapter life leadership mentor, master certified life coach, and certified Zentangle teacher. This podcast is for women over 50 whose lives look fine on the outside, but don't feel as clear or as intentional as they used to be. Because here's what I've seen over and over again. What most women think is a clarity problem, it usually isn't. There's something else going on underneath that, and it's surprisingly easy to miss when your life is working. And what makes this so tricky is that nothing looks wrong. Your life works, you're responsible, you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And that's exactly why this is so easy to miss. So if you feel stuck right now, don't worry, you're not alone, and this episode will help you see what is really going on. But just quick, if you're already recognizing yourself in this, don't brush that off. Don't slough it off. Because most women don't need more information. You probably don't need more information. What you usually need is to see your own life more clearly. And that's exactly what I help you do. Inside a next chapter direction session, we take a focused look at what's actually going on, what you may not be seeing, and what needs to change. You can book yours at www.talktosusie.com. Okay, now let's dive in. Most women I work with are not confused in the way they think they are. They're smart, thoughtful, self-aware, and yet they still feel stuck. And for a lot of women, this shows up in a super specific way. Spinning, thinking about what you want, revisiting the same ideas, waiting to feel sure, but not actually moving forward. So when I experienced this in my late 40s and early 50s, I thought it was confusion. I really did. I kept coming back to that emotion. But the more I understood what was really going on, I realized that this isn't about being confused all the time. It's about being inside something that you can't fully see. I call this the invisible pattern problem. It's when your life is being shaped by patterns that feel completely normal, but you can't fully see them from the inside. And there's another layer to this that I've been thinking about a lot lately. It's not just that we're not seeing certain patterns in our lives. It's that we've stopped seeing our lives with any real sense of amazement. We take so much for granted. Think about it, the routines, the relationships, the access we have, the options in front of us. And over time, life starts to feel ordinary. But ask yourself, what if it's not? What if the issue isn't your life, but how you're seeing it? So if you're not stuck because you don't know what to do, you're stuck because you haven't fully seen how you're actually living. Now, I know that might be kind of a big concept to get your head around. So I'm going to share a couple of stories and hopefully that will help. I want to start with one of my personal experiences about work. Toward the end of my corporate health education career, I was in my job for 19 years. And for the last 5 years of that time, I was spinning. I knew something needed to change. I knew I probably needed to leave, but I didn't have clarity about what I wanted to do next. And because I didn't have clarity, I stayed put. I told myself things like, I just can't walk away without knowing what's next. That would be irresponsible. I would lose my benefits. So I kept thinking, I kept analyzing, I kept trying to figure it out. And the truth is that I felt stuck in a way that I had never felt stuck before. But there was an interesting part to all this. For most of those 19 years, I actually loved my job. I felt content. So when that started to change, when I started to feel restless, even kind of agitated, it just felt so strange. It felt like a really big deal because it was so different. So I did what a lot of us do. I started researching. I made lists of everything I've ever been interested in, from dog grooming to real estate to floral design to becoming a teacher or a psychologist. I booked appointments to talk to people about it. I explored the options. But underneath all of that, I was still spinning. And I noticed something else. I was asking other people what they thought I should do. Surely my smart friends and colleagues knew me better than I knew myself. And that was weird, right? I felt so directionless, like I just didn't think I had a clue how to solve this problem. And at some point, I realized something else. I wasn't just lacking clarity, I was afraid. And fear was absolutely involved in my decisions and my behavior. And then something happened that forced things forward. I turned 50, I got laid off, and that's when things got real because now I couldn't just think about it anymore. I had to engage, I had to take action, I had to do something. So I started exploring coaching more seriously. I at the beginning of this whole process of being stuck for as long as I didn't even know coaching was a thing. So I really wanted to learn about it. I went to workshops, I got curious, and then slowly but surely, something started to shift. But looking back now, this is what I see so clearly. At that time, I thought I needed clarity. But what I really needed was to see what the heck was actually going on. I was inside patterns I couldn't fully see. The fear, the overthinking, and waiting for certainty. And as long as I was inside those patterns, of course I couldn't get clear. And this is exactly what I mean by the invisible pattern problem. When something feels off in your life, most of us try to figure it out, think it through, analyze what we want. But here's the problem. You're trying to evaluate your life from inside the same patterns that created it. So of course it feels unclear. Spinning isn't the problem. It's what happens when you're trying to figure out your life from inside those patterns that you can't really see. I wish there were glasses for this. Wouldn't that be great? So this can look like thinking about retirement, but never defining it, or wanting something different, but not taking action, or maybe feeling restless, but not knowing why, or feeling busy, but not being fulfilled. And the thought is, I just need more clarity. But that's not actually it. So this can show up in everyday kinds of things too. And my CPAP story is one of those everyday things that was going on for a very long time. I think maybe it was somewhere between 10 and 15 years. My husband told me I should get a sleep study. And every time he brought it up, I got super annoyed. I brushed it off. I didn't want to deal with it. And then I got an Oura ring. Do you know what that is? It's like a smart ring that monitors and gives feedback to you about a whole bunch of health metrics. And I really wanted to know more about my sleep. So it started giving me data about all kinds of health-related things, including my sleep. But there was more. There was data about my breathing. And suddenly, with that data, I paid attention. It was a real wake-up call. And not long after that, during a routine physical, my doctor asked me if I snored. And this time, I was open and I was curious. And I moved forward with a sleep study. And now I use a CPAP machine with no complaints, even though it is super weird looking. And there's lots of jokes about that. But I have to say, it's made a real difference that I can feel and also see in black and white with the regular data from my Oura ring. So here's the point. Nothing about this situation was new. I had heard about it for years, and my husband wasn't the only one complaining about my snoring. But I wasn't seeing it the same way. That's what this looks like in real life. Nothing about that situation was new. I had heard about it for years, but this time it landed differently. I wasn't seeing it in the same way. And this is where something else really important comes in. Years ago, I created something called a radical amazement worksheet because I started to notice that when you slow down and really look at your life, even the most ordinary things are kind of incredible. Things we completely take for granted, like breathing well when you sleep, like having access to information about your health that's right at your fingertips, literally, like being able to actually do something about it. But most of the time, we don't experience our lives that way. We're too used to them, so we stop noticing. And sometimes this invisible pattern problem shows up in ways that are almost ridiculous when you really look at them. And I have a perfect example. It is my underwear drawer. And if you've been around with the podcast for a while and in my community for a while, you may have heard me explain this, but today I'm going to explain it to you in a little bit of a different context. At some point in my 40s, I just stopped really paying attention to my underwear. my underwear drawer, my underwear, and everything included under that topic. And over time, I ended up wearing what I can only describe as pathetic underwear, or what I affectionately call pathetic panties. Stretched out, worn out, not doing their job anymore. Like, honestly, they actually fell down once while I was walking across a parking lot with grocery bags in my hands. Thank God for the skirt I was wearing. That's all I'll say about that. I've talked about this before in greater detail, and I'll put the links in the show notes if you're interested. Now, the bottom line, and no pun intended, the bottom line is that they didn't look good, and they didn't feel good, and they definitely didn't help me feel good about myself. But here's what's so interesting. I didn't really question it. When I finally looked at it, I realized that there was a pattern underneath. It felt confusing. I felt confused about where to even buy underwear anymore. It felt weirdly complicated. So instead of figuring it out, I just didn't. And before I knew it, over 10 or more years had gone by, and here I was, a smart, capable, resourceful woman who could solve all kinds of problems, but I hadn't dealt with what was going on in my own underwear drawer. And that's the point. It wasn't about underwear. It was about a pattern I wasn't seeing. That's what autopilot looks like, and that's what not seeing clearly looks like too. So here's why it's so tricky. It feels normal. It's your routines, your habits, your default ways of thinking, so you don't question them. You can't change what's invisible to you. Because when you start to see your life more clearly, something else happens too. You start to see how much of your life you've been treating as just normal, when it's actually pretty remarkable. And that's the shift from taking your life for granted to experiencing it with more amazing. That changes how you think about everything. So what about you? Where might this be true for you right now? Instead of asking, what should I do next? Try asking, what am I not seeing about how I'm living right now? And this becomes even more important in your 50s and 60s because time starts to feel different. And once you really see that, it becomes much harder to keep living the same way by default. And this, my friend, is where the life leadership piece of this whole thing begins. It doesn't have to be with a big giant decision, but it does have to be with a clear view. Clarity doesn't come from thinking harder. It comes from seeing more clearly. So if this is resonating with you, don't ignore it. You might be thinking about all kinds of stuff right now because I gave you examples that made it easier to get your head around. Don't ignore it because most of us don't need more information. We need a clearer view of what's actually going on. And this is exactly what we do in the next chapter direction session. And you can book yours at talktosusie.com. Please don't ignore this. Remember, sometimes the most powerful shift isn't something new, but instead, it can be finally seeing what's been there all along. And sometimes it's realizing how extraordinary your life already is. All right, that's what I've got for you today. If this episode made sense, please pay attention. That feeling that something is slightly off is so important. It's your life asking for your attention. And the good news is that you're starting to see. So as always, thanks so much for listening to the Women in the Middle show. Please remember to share it with your friends and other midlife gals that you know would get a lot out of it. And if you really enjoyed it, please also consider leaving a review, which will help other midlife gals also find the show. Being the queen of your brain domain is the best way to be. It's time to stop living like time doesn't matter, because it does. Remember, if you need coaching support for the changes you're excited to make in midlife, I'm here for you, and I offer group and private coaching. Head over to www.talktosusie.com. For show notes and links, go to www.susierosenstein.com and click on the podcast tab and look for episode 459. And you'll also see a link there for my other show, The Women in the Middle Entrepreneurs, which is all about the reality of running your business when you're a midlife gal. It's also on iTunes, Spotify, and all the podcast places. Let's do this, ladies. It's time for you to put yourself first, one thought at a time. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next week.